So welcome to Dave Simmons in Auckland and Colin Newlin, who's in London. And we're going to be exploring different facets of what's happened as a result of COVID-19 and how it's impacted on the future, or how it will impact on the future of work. Just quick introduction. I know Dave from my travel days in Going Places Travel, which we've just ascertained is now over 20 years ago, which is a bit worrying. And Dave's now in Auckland in New Zealand, and Colin is in London, and we believe we met when you were actually allowed to physically meet people at a networking event way back when. So I'll let you introduce yourselves quickly and what you're doing. So we'll start with Dave.
Great. Hey, thanks very much, Steve. And wonderful to have the opportunity to catch up with you again. I guess after many years in senior leadership roles, both in the UK and back here in New Zealand, leading teams across sort of geographically dispersed sort of jurisdictions, I've always been super passionate about organizational culture and how getting that right to create the foundations for subsequent business success is absolutely the keystone of business. And that whole concept about culture eats strategy every time, kind of I've lived and breathed that for a long time. 12 months ago, I took the call to step away from the corporate environment and actually follow that passion a little more deeply to provide guidance and advice to help other companies unlock and explore the potential of organizational culture and what it means to harness that, and how do you go about embracing and building that out. The goldfish analogy came about literally by looking at a goldfish bowl one day. I was at a friend's place and saw the fish swimming around, and I'd been grappling with this concept around this change that's been happening in front of us through the COVID and the sudden kind of rapid kind of deconstruction of the workplace environment. I'd worked in organizations where you weren't allowed to work from home and there was no good reason for it. And then all of a sudden, they're forced to go and work from home. So this idea of the goldfish bowl being broken, and what does that mean for the poor goldfish on the floor? Are they gasping for air, or are they actually finding their way down the drain pipe and out into the ocean and being able to kind of swim freely from there? It's an interesting one to explore.
Yeah. So, Colin, we'll just bring you in there, and if you can just give a quick intro and your take on things as well, and we'll see how it all meshes.
Okay. I had a corporate career in telecoms and sort of IT areas.
You've gone a bit quiet, Colin.
Let me put my headphones back in again. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had a corporate career in telecoms and IT, and it had sort of two parts to it. The first part was brilliant, and the second part was terrible, and it got progressively worse. And when I eventually left and I started to do coaching, I kept meeting people who had had a very similar experience, and it's sort of been at the back of why is it like that? Why has this been getting worse and worse? So I've been sort of pulling at that thread more recently, and what I'm doing now is sort of helping people recognise the changes that are possible and help them figure out what those changes need to be. And part of that was in part of that sort of process of trying to figure out what the hell had been going on. I sort of came up with this idea. Actually, there's been a process going on here called the crapification of work process, and it's not a single thing. I thought it was just work for some bad people or whatever, but it's a number of different things that have come together to make the workplace this sort of like dysfunctional, toxic mess that a lot of people are finding it. So so about 5 years ago, I think I read the Frederick Laloux book, Reinventing Organizations, and that was like that just changed my perspective completely, because I knew there was a better way of doing things because I'd lived it. And so, this is the way forward. And I remember going to a conference a friend of mine organised, and we had this very exciting conversation about this is the shift, it's all going to happen. And like 5 years later, very, very little had happened because there was a huge amount of resistance in people.
Yeah.
For a number of different complex reasons. And so what COVID-19 has done is it's made that shift happen, because it's all been possible. You know, I was working with a laptop from home 30 years ago.
Yeah.
These things have always been possible,
Yeah.
but people have resisted them, and COVID hasn't given people a choice. All this stuff that they said, no, we can't do that. No, our business wouldn't work like that. Well, they're working like that, for good or ill.
Yeah.
So to me, the question is, now this change has happened, there's no way we're going to go back to exactly how things were before, and we shouldn't go back to the way things were before, because they weren't working very well.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a great summation, Colin. So let's explore both of your analogies in terms of, because what particularly interested me was your posts on LinkedIn, Dave and Colin, got a huge amount of engagement, and it seems to me that at the moment everyone's social media'd out, and all of a sudden engagement levels are really going down, aren't they, on stuff? But your two posts stood out like a sore thumb. It might just be because I was particularly interested in the topic. But what would you, before we explore where we think things are going to go, out of all the responses you got to your posts on LinkedIn, what sort of resonated the most?
Certainly from my perspective, Steve, I guess it was the simplification of the concept, and when presenting kind of such a simple idea as a goldfish bowl and representing an organization, I think everyone could resonate with the idea that the goldfish bowl represented the walls of the office, and that those walls have literally been broken down, as Colin's saying, by the pandemic, and the implications of that are still playing through, and both good and bad. I completely agree with Colin's points. There are lots and lots of positives, but I think that, what we're also identifying is that actually a lot of companies, whilst they were able to make the technical shift, haven't actually yet fully made the cultural shift, and they actually haven't thought about the cultural implications of it. And the Zoom drinks on a Friday night is kind of a band-aid to a far broader issue that companies will have to face up to, as we move forward, as we think about the sort of long-term play and what is sustainable kind of management of culture looks like in this more flexible virtual environment. So I think it was the simplicity of that sort of the analogy between the goldfish bowl and the office. And I think a lot of people could I guess relate to that as a concept.
Yeah, no, I get that totally. And the respondents to both your posts on LinkedIn do you think most of those were employees in corporate environments, or were they more freelance, self-employed people, or mixture of both? Because obviously mindset is key in this, but when you're working for yourself, or you got your own business, it's much easier to see these things, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I had a mix. I think the thing that struck me about the responses I got was that it was mostly, yeah, absolutely right, bring it on. There's a recognition and a pent up desire for some sort of change, which shouldn't really surprise us given the employee engagement stats and general state of the world. And it's a mix of, obviously I know quite a few consultants and coaches and people like that who are very supportive. But yeah, I had quite a few comments from people who are working. I think, the people in employment can see the opportunities, and they want a different way of working. They're fed up with the old compromises. Yeah.
So do you think, back to that word shift, Colin, directing this to both of you, I find it fascinating because I was reading something the other day, and I also had a conversation with, I don't know what day of the week it is, probably like you guys, but
I hope they're into one.
And the feeling of thought was that even people who themselves were actually a bit anti-remote working were now enjoying the process of having that freedom and flexibility to actually work from home. and they were suddenly thinking, well, hang on a minute, why was I resisting it? So it's not just employers, actually employees as well. I don't know if you found the same.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comment, Steve. I think for a lot of people, the office walls represent a security blanket, right? In terms of, that is my sanctuary, it's my place of belonging during the day. And, if I'm not there, am I at risk? What's job security look like? There's an element of confidence in there. And I think, again, for me, that comes down to the strength of the cultural framework that exists. If there's a great cultural framework where there's a strong emotional connection between employee and employer, that sort of risk doesn't, sort of is lessened and diminished, right? But, where there's a sort of not a healthy culture, Colin was alluding to the sort of environment that he was working in, towards the end of his corporate time. I can imagine that sort of scenario being, pretty unsettling. If you don't turn up to work one day, is there going to be a box on your desk when you get in the next day type scenario, or someone been backstabbing you while you've been out? So, I think that, again, that goldfish bowl for some people represent a security blanket, and, that's where I'm comfortable doing my job and managing my risk. But again, for me, that's a reflection of cultural strength as opposed to anything else.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what do we think is going to happen moving forward, guys? Because this is a $64,000 question, isn't it? And any way we can influence in our own way would be brilliant, wouldn't it?
I think, I think the reason we were talking about the word shift is we sort of felt there was this, this pent up pressure of the dysfunction of organisations, and like tectonic plates, there'd be a big shift. And we have had this big change, but it hasn't been the way that we thought. It's actually caused, rather than causing, in some ways, the sort of disruption of an earthquake, we've had this sort of pause, because it's all just like everyone's started working from home, and for a lot of people, it's given them time to reflect upon, like, well, why were we doing all that? What is important to me, and what do I want? And actually, I can take responsibility for myself and have more autonomy over my time, and I like it. So I don't think people are going to give up those freedoms very easily. They're going to want to see more of it, and I think smart organisations will listen to their people. That, as they try and come up with how they're going to be after this, they'll start off by going and asking their people, well, what do you want?
Well, you'd hope so, wouldn't you, Colin?
I did say smart organisations.
Yeah. But Dave, if you now sort of look at that from a leadership perspective, what's this going to mean for how managers and leaders actually rethink their whole strategy? If they're going to have people more widespread and people who not just demanding remote working, but I personally believe there's going to be much more of a cry for flexible working in all sorts of respects. How are they going to adapt their styles to meet that, do you think?
Yeah, listen, I think there's probably a couple of mindsets that will play out here, right? Which one will be those who, from a leadership perspective, go, great, I can save 30 or 40% of my rent costs, and we're going to kind of embrace that and reduce some of our lease costs. Probably the organisations that I might not want to be involved with, perhaps, because they're seeing it the wrong way. I completely agree with Colin in terms, and I think this is a global kind of scenario. This pandemic, in many ways, has been a reset, and I think it's absolutely a historical time from workplace environment sort of perspective, in terms of people are reevaluating what's important to them. What do they want out of their work environment? What do they want out of a personal environment? Their whole work-life balance, family connections. And I think that's going to be the driver of the seismic shift. But I think what is also kind of coming out here a little bit is, yes, I've discovered I can work from home, and geez, not having to commute into town every day to the office is fabulous. But I also miss catching up with my colleagues every now and then, right? So I don't think there's going to be a wholesale shift to complete home working. I think we're out there right at the moment, but there'll be a kind of a sort of convergence back to more of a balance. And it may well be people are mixing what they're doing. They might be kind of home 2 or 3 days a week. They might be in the office 2 or 3 days a week. I think, ironically, the likes of the WeWork type model, which was probably a little ahead of its time, I think that type of model actually will become more prevalent in terms of, you know, people working from home. They might not have that right workspace, and they've been forced to work from home at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, there's shared office and co-location and collaboration in that sort of environment. But I think the absolute key thing from a leadership perspective, you know, this is really challenging from a leadership perspective. Yeah. A lot of leaders haven't had the chance to actually think it through yet. They've been dealing with a crisis. They've been focusing on the survival mode. What do we do to get through this? You know, how do we preserve cash and actually just get through this? The companies, for me, that are going to thrive as they come out of here, the leaders that are going to thrive as they come out of this, are those who kind of recognize they have to embrace this reset. They have to get that sense of purpose right in their organization, and they have to reset that cultural framework, the values and those behavioral and sort of manifestations that align to underpin that cultural framework. They have to work bloody hard to get that right. If they get it right, they'll get those employees with a deeper emotional connection, a stronger engagement, and it'll help them kind of lift out. I think for me, those were the companies that get it. When they get it, they are going to thrive as they come out of this. You know, there's a lot of hard roads ahead, no shadow of doubt about that. And as we navigate through the survival phase, those who get into that thrive mentality and do it from a people-led purpose, you know, perspective, are going to be the ones that take off as we come out of it.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you, Dave. But what about the groups of people who it's their worst nightmare? Like they got 3 kids running around at home, and I mean, I've got a couple of clients who I'm coaching, and we started off face to face, had very good relationship, quite happy to work over Zoom. That's not the issue, but all the stuff they're trying to do, working on themselves, and you know, they've got kids running around, they've now got their husband or wife at home as well, and it's like mayhem, and they've just got no thinking space at all. How do you think those people are going to readjust? Because you know, I'm all with you, Colin, about decrapifying work, but what do you think it's going to mean for those sort of people, Colin?
Well, I think the point is that it will mean different things for different people. So we have this, we've all accepted this sort of like one size fits all approach to work, you know, which at its worst is, you know, you go and sit on a tube that goes under the ground for an hour, and then you go and sit in an office with a bunch of other people and talk to each other on email. And that's normal, supposedly. And the reality is that everyone's got different requirements. You know, they've got different requirements because of their family, because of their aspirations, because of their personality. So, you know, I mean, I hate working in an open plan environment. I find it really difficult. Other people love it. And yet we have open plan offices because they're cheaper. You know, so it's about, and I think what this has shown people is that, you know, there are alternatives, there are options. If they were given, they could design their own approach to work that would suit them and enable them to contribute the most to the company. So, you know, I agree. I think it's the companies that recognise this shift has happened and try and build upon it rather than go back to what happened before. Because, you know, a lot of it comes down to trust. I mean, that was the thing that was holding back companies from doing this, was they didn't trust their staff.
Well,
they've had that trust environment forced upon them, so they can either embrace it or they can fight it. And if they fight it, I don't think they're going to have a very good outcome.
No, absolutely right. And that T word, the big T word, Colin, I'm pleased you mentioned that, because I saw something the other day which was quite horrifying. The suggestion was that after the first few weeks of lockdown, where everyone was sort of in a bit of a either panic or, you know, some sort of state of confusion, they didn't really know what the hell was going on. Now things have settled down a bit. The feeling of thought in some organisations is that staff who are home-based actually are concerned about being watched by their bosses in terms of, are they putting enough effort in and so on, and they're working ridiculous hours, and there's a fear of burnout. You think, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. So this trust element is absolutely fundamental, isn't it? I mean, I always cringe when I hear people saying that, oh, we don't allow our staff to work remotely or work from home because we don't know what they're going to get up to. We don't know they're actually doing any work or not. And our daughter, she lives in LA or Long Beach, California, and she said they just don't allow this sort of stuff out there because that's not the mindset. Well, taking Dave's analogy, the goldfish bowl has broken, and they've had to embrace it now. So in all countries around the world, so culture's obviously different. But do you honestly believe, guys, that employers will say to their staff, right, now we've been through this, can we sort of survey you to get your feelings, your thoughts about where we go next? Do you think that's going to happen?
I think the genie's out of the bottle, Steve. I cannot see how you can put this back in at this point in time, right? It's we had the Industrial Revolution. This is almost like the employee revolution, and I just can't see how you can unwind the clock from. I can't see how you can unwind the clock from this in terms of people have had the taste of working in different ways, and I just can't see employees are going to be able to move forward in any way, shape, or form if they try to go back, 3 months, wind the clock back 3 months. It's not going to happen. Life's changed. We're all going to be living in a world that's different for the next, for as long as we can see right now, which is going to mean people have to be able to work differently. You can't be in an open plan office with someone sitting kind of 600 mils away from you, because actually you can't. You've got to be kind of 2 meters away. So all of a sudden you're different, and actually organisations will have to stagger workforces, et cetera, et cetera. And that then leads to that kind of humanistic piece, which Colin's talking about. Everyone's different. And from a leadership perspective, this is the big challenge, right, is that you're going to have to really build that kind of idea, really embrace empathy at an individual level and be cognizant of the needs of individuals. And, things like, has someone's partner just been made redundant, for example, and are they going through all sorts of challenges at home? Have they got 3 young preschool kids, or actually have they got kids who are having to try to homeschool, and they're having flexibility around that and being able to accommodate that? So, alongside trust, I think comes empathy and being able to understand at an individual level how you can get the best out of people to deliver for your organisation.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. And thanks for that, Dave. And that sort of leads on to what you guys feel. What are the key skills that you believe are now going to be absolutely the essential key skills that are now going to be required? We can look at it both from employer and employees. So because they're going to change, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. I think what Dave said about empathy, and what this has done is opened up whole new bits of people's lives that were previously just ignored. So you can't pretend that staff don't have a full life with other demands on their time. You've got to take that into account, and you've got to show some care for it. And I think it's also shown that this sort of like mechanistic idea of how companies work is completely out of date, because in this chaos, the only way you can deal with it is to allow your people to be creative. So it's going to be, from a leadership perspective, you've got to be someone who can really get the most out of your people and let them lead, if you like, where the work goes, rather than the model that has persisted for too long, which is I'm the boss, I tell you what to do, and then I check up on you. That's just not going to work.
So we're suggesting that that's part of the Covid Goldfish bowl that's going to be broken then. I mean, I hope you're right, because I think it's terrible to say that article I read about the people, I don't know what company it was, it may be more than one, who were actually terrified. They were working at home, really worrying about whether their boss was watching on them, and would they be seeing how much time they spent doing a particular task and how much time they spent doing the cooking. I mean, it's ludicrous, isn't it?
It's hard to comprehend, Steve, and it's horrible to hear those sort of stories, right? It just shouldn't exist, in this day and age where, that sort of mindset is leading or managing people as opposed to leading people. But dreadful. But so I can't see how both philosophically or practically you can actually wind back the clock at this point in time. Just your organisation.
So if you imagine, I'm just sort of thinking a hypothetical example here, guys. So somebody has an interview for a job, right? It could be in this way, or even when they can have face-to-face, and they're asked about how their expectations about the job and blah 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 blah. And I can recall one of my clients, and it literally was only a few weeks ago, before the world changed as we knew it, who was really worried about asking a potential employer that she went for an interview with if she could work 4 days a week. Yeah, she thought that might just blow the job, and even better if I can work remotely. Of course, it's a complete irony now, isn't it? It's all been turned on its head. So, do you think that people would be going in with that? Basically saying that, this is what I'm looking for from this company.
I think it depends on what, the sort of, the way companies have run has been, that they put together a very detailed job spec and they hire against that. And that's not really helping at the moment, because what you really want are people who are creative and agile, adaptable, and all that good stuff. And if you've got those skills, you're not going to be working to a tight job spec. You're going to be defining your own role as you see appropriately. And so I suppose what I'm saying is that companies that switch over to looking to hire people with aptitude like that are going to be much more capable and much more flexible and adaptable and innovative and all that stuff that they're going to need going forward. Companies that stick to the old way and have those fixed attitudes are really going to struggle in this new world.
So with that point, Colin, which I totally agree with, do you feel there's more of an opportunity for freelancers to be recruited into organisations because they have that skill set and mindset already? The interview I did the other week with our daughter, she's a prime example. She's been freelance for years in the children's media industry, and all of a sudden she's been hired into this top exec role, which she wasn't necessarily thinking about, a few months ago. But I'm convinced that a key part of the reason for that, because she's used to working in this way. They're in the UK, she's in LA. Most of their clients are all around the globe. So it is it's a mix of skill set and mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, we've had this sort of split between, you're either in the corporate career or you're going down the sort of freelance portfolio, whatever you want to call it. And I think that we're going to see far more blending of that going forward, and people will move in and out, and the corporate roles will become more amenable to that, because at the moment making that jump into some corporations is like it's like going into another universe. It's going to be much more recognised that that's the way careers go, and it's going to be a lot easier to do, and it's going to be more beneficial to both parties.
Yeah, so they become more malleable, if you like.
Yeah.
And I as someone who's a great champion of the portfolio career myself, I can certainly see that people could be working partly for an organisation employed, and partly doing stuff in their own right, self-employed freelance. So I think maybe that's the future of work for many people moving forward.
I think the other context, Steve, is, again, just recognising the realities, the economic realities over the next sort of 12, 24, 36 months. A lot of organisations are going to be kind of seeking their way forward gingerly, if you like, as everyone's contracted. No one's going to go immediately back to what they were, and everyone's going to be very gingerly kind of walking their way out of here. So, all of a sudden, kind of freelance or contract staff actually look a lot more attractive to the corporates.
Yeah.
And actually, if you can get the right person to do a role for you, and they actually might not be based in your office, and that saves you some office space, that also is going to be potentially helpful to my P&L, right? So, I think as we go forward, the economic reality is going to only butt and grain some of this transition that's actually happening. It might not be by choice in some instances, for those slightly less progressive organisations, but I think it will be forced upon them financially to be pragmatic. You're not all of a sudden going to re-employ that person that you got rid of 3 months ago, but you might need some of those skill sets. So I think that is also kind of the other lens upon which to look at it. This is a long-term play in terms of coming out of where we are currently.
Yeah, no, that's great point, Dave. Well, I could talk about this forever, as I'm sure you guys could. It's been fascinating conversation, so I think we better draw a line under it there now. Maybe if you're up for it, we may even revisit this in a few weeks once we see what the world is doing, and then see what's happening, and judge it from there. But thanks ever so much, Dave and Colin. And most importantly, stay safe.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks very much, Steve, and lovely to meet you, Colin.
Yeah, and you, Dave. Thanks, Steve.